And I think the book, in refusing to imagine Natalie as a sincere person, is doing the exact same thing that it accuses her of doing. It is performing critique without actually believing in the humanity of its target. It's performing the posture of cultural criticism while withholding the one thing cultural criticism actually requires, which is the willingness to grant your subject full personhood. I have been waiting for the publication date of Yesteryear for months. I hit that notify me button in the Libby app the second that Caro Claire Burke mentioned it on her podcast, Diabolical Lies. I wanted to be the first person to borrow it after publication because I knew that there was going to be a super long waiting list. The hype surrounding this book just continued to build while I was waiting. There was a bidding war for the manuscript, which is unheard of for a debut novel. There's a screenplay adaptation with Anne Hathaway's backing and endless press and journalism. So when the title became available for me in Libby, I cleared my entire weekend. I was so excited. Got my coffee, sat down, ready to read.
And within 2 pages, I was disappointed.
Am I crazy?
This book is genuinely excellent. It is actually one of my favorite reads in recent memory, and the twist genuinely surprised me, which almost never happens anymore. I could not put it down. But in chapter 1, I realized I was about to spend my weekend with a nasty, angry, bitter person from jump. And given that the plot of the book is revealed on the back cover, I knew her personality was not going to be improving anytime soon. And it's not just that she's unlikable, because I enjoy anti-heroes a lot. It's that we open the book seeing evidence that Natalie does not sincerely hold the beliefs that she professes to hold. And immediately that just made the book less interesting to me. I was hoping to read about how a true believer gets to the point of performing, about someone who turns their beliefs into an aesthetic that they get paid to broadcast to the world. Yesteryear is not that book. I'm glad I kept reading though, because once I accepted Yesteryear for the story that it wanted to tell, I was able to really sink into it. And I believe the book was intended to be thought-provoking, that Caro wanted us to wrestle with these questions about all these big topics that the book could only cover on a shallow level. And that's what I'm doing here. As the author of multiple books myself, I know how much it sucks to receive criticism of your book. But I also find it a really great honor when someone is moved enough or passionate enough about my writing to do an entire think piece on it. So in that spirit, let's dive in. I'm not going to recap because if you're watching a long-form video essay on this book, you already know what it's about. You've probably already read it. And even if you haven't read it, I don't need to give spoilers in order to unpack the themes that I'm interested in, because it's the core premise of the book that is still kind of bugging me. It's not the surprise twist in the end, but the beginning. Because the thing that Yesteryear cannot imagine, the thing that almost no high-profile literary fiction about religious women seems to be able to imagine in a way that rings true to me, is a woman who actually believes what she claims to believe. When we meet Natalie, she has no inner life that we can take seriously. She's already cynical and mean. She's been raised by a family that seems to care more about the appearance of religion than anything else. And from that first chapter, Natalie's faith is already a bit. It's a performance that she's doing for the camera for other people. She was a scholarship kid at Harvard who couldn't fit in with the coastal elites. She married into money, but had a husband who couldn't seem to play his traditional gender role as financial provider. And she figured out that she could monetize an aesthetic and then built an empire out of lifestyle fraud. That's who we're told she is. And that's who she is all the way through the 1805 sections and the backstory chapters. The book never gives us the version of Natalie who at one time actually believed what she professes to believe. So if she ever was a believer, it happened off stage before the novel starts. We don't get to watch her faith be real and then curdle. We just meet her after the curdling is complete. And in fact, it's not even really clear what she claims to believe. Is she meant to be an evangelical Christian, a fundamentalist, part of the LDS church? I think the specifics are irrelevant in the author's mind because this book isn't pointing to any one particular religion as the problem. It's really emblematic of something that's much bigger. But the one-star Goodreads reviews from Christians show that I'm not the only one who finds it hard to buy into Natalie's faith when it's painted as a persona, and we see not one sincere believer of whatever religion this is anywhere in the book. Everyone is either using religions to access money and power and status, or they're rejecting religion and then using that as a tool to access money and power and status. It's not just the religious characters that come across as one-dimensional. Reena is supposed to function as a counterpoint to all of this, the semi-successful secular feminist who made the other set of choices. But Reena is also flat and underdeveloped, and she comes across too as an unhappy person who doesn't actually seem to want to live the life she's living. No one in this book does. And so I appreciate that as a counterpoint, this idea that everyone is performing, that everyone is living up to somebody else's expectations, that nobody is really free. But it felt like another missed opportunity. And the male characters are even flatter. They are all truly awful people with no interiority at all. And it's honestly not clear whether that was intentional or not. I appreciate the skewering that Caro gives to both the left and the right, to the devout and the non-believer in this book, but this flat, broad brush that she's using to paint everyone as a fraud with no sincerely held beliefs makes it hard to root for anyone in the book. Not only is Natalie faking it, so is literally everyone else around her. And that feels untrue, even within fundamentalism. I grew up in that environment, and so I know what sincere belief looks like from the inside. I know what it feels like to genuinely hold a worldview that outsiders think is absurd. It's not all just an act for everyone. And so it feels like the easy way out and the less interesting path, at least to me, to write all the characters as people without sincerely held values that they live by. While Yesteryear is a really groundbreaking book in the way that it covers the tradwife phenomenon and social media as it overlaps with fundamentalism, I think the lack of any true believers in the book weakens the story. Now, let me make my case here, because you might be thinking, okay, Angela, this is meant to be satire. It's meant to be an extreme example. We don't need to have nuanced characters to make the point that she's trying to make. But let me compare it to some other things. Consider Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. This is still the reigning champion of religious extremism fiction. Atwood's Gilead is explicitly run by a mix of true believers and people who use the theology instrumentally and weaponize religion. The true believers are used and manipulated by those who use claimed divine authority as a tool for authoritarianism, control, and the consolidation of wealth and power. So we see both. We see folks waver, we see folks change between the two, and we see people who aren't really sure if they believe or not. That's what makes Atwood's writing, as well as the show, The Handmaid's Tale, such a fascinating, rich, and layered piece of media, and why it feels so eerily realistic, because that's how humans actually behave. Some people really believe what they claim to believe, others are grifters, and each has a different impact on outsiders. All of this is missing in Yesteryear. Another example is the Book of Essie by Megan McLean Weir. I actually DNF'd that one. I got about 20% in, and then when I realized that the pregnant teenage protagonist, pro-life, evangelical mom, immediately starts floating abortion as an option for her, I just lost interest. Because I am sure that there are fundamentalist moms who would do that. But there are also enormous numbers of them for whom abortion is genuinely unthinkable. And for some reason, the book just couldn't imagine that. It was such a cynical read. The author assumed that when the stakes got high enough, everyone's beliefs are negotiable, which is what outsiders assume about fundamentalism because they cannot picture what sincere belief actually looks like. And Yesteryear does the same move. It assumes that Natalie's faith was always a costume that she put on, first to please her mother, then to fit in, then to sell the brand. Her father-in-law is running for president on values that he doesn't hold. Her husband is a spoiled Nepo baby who wouldn't know a genuine conviction if it hit him in the face. The producer, the nannies, the aesthetic, the followers, the whole ecosystem, it's just cynical all the way down. And I want to say again that this makes for a really compelling read. I'm just pointing out that this take is kind of a genre convention at this point, which makes it less edgy, less interesting, and I think shapes how we see real people in troubling ways. The sincere believer is a fascinating character in my mind, much more so than the person who has no sincerely held beliefs. Exhibit A is TLC's reality TV show, Welcome to Plathville. The Plaths are a family that came out of deep fundamentalism. They have 9 kids that were raised on a farm in rural Georgia. They were homeschooled, no TV, no internet, the whole sheltered thing. And the mom, Kim, has the family touring the country, singing gospel songs in a way that feels very Duggar adjacent. And since she's the one who applied to have the TV crew follow her family around, I can assume that she was seeking the Duggar kind of fame. Over the run of the show, which is on the boring side but also somehow fascinating, the whole family has kind of bled out of the original belief system, but in different directions. The adult kids have fully abandoned their strict religious upbringing. The parents have now divorced. The mom has been convicted of a DUI. And basically, there is a public renegotiation of everything that they were raised in. Frustratingly, the producers don't really pull at these threads, and we've never had a real reckoning of what the parents in particular believe now and why and how they've changed so much. It's kind of unclear exactly what's happening, except for Lydia. The second eldest daughter, Lydia, is still a believer in Jesus as her savior. She's less legalistic than she used to be. She's finding her own version of what her faith means. And she's clearly done real personal work to figure out what she believes and what she doesn't. But she still, as far as anyone can tell from the show, has a sincerely held faith as she was raised to have, a belief in traditional marriage and gender roles, using the Bible as a guidebook for life, and so on. And what is notable about Lydia and what is missing in any character within the pages of Yesteryear is that she carries this faith with genuine humility, with gentleness, and with sincerity. She is not a caricature or a grifter. Lydia, despite being on reality TV, seems to be a real person whose belief is sincere, and it makes her kinder and not meaner. And people like Lydia exist everywhere. They are all around us. They're in long, plain dresses, and they're also in jeans. Some of them are tradwife influencers, and some of these tradwife influencers actually believe what they're saying. So while it kind of sounds like I'm turning this video into an apology for tradwives, what I'm saying is that I think the nuance and the depth of belief, a less cynical interpretation, would feel more interesting to me. And to have the true believers is important because it just makes the whole tapestry of what you're reading or watching more interesting. The grifters, the people who are using fundamentalism or tradwife aesthetics or prosperity gospel or any of that stuff as a vehicle for money or attention or fame, they need these true believers to exist so that they can leverage the believers' credibility. The only reason that a grift like Natalie's would work in the Yesteryear world is because there are thousands of actual tradwives, unpaid, unfollowed, homeschooling their 8 kids in rural Montana, who genuinely believe that this is what God wants from them. These women lend the tradwife movement its authenticity, and then the influencers extract value from that authenticity. And when the influencer gets exposed or arrested or has an entire Netflix documentary made about them, everyone lumps the sincere believers in with the grifters and writes the whole thing off as a con. And that's what Yesteryear does, structurally. It assumes the whole thing is a con, and it doesn't really have a place for the sincere women who have built the movement that the con is acting from or borrowing from. Now, would I have liked to see Natalie be one of these sincere women and then watch her deconstruct her faith across 400 pages as her marriage crumbles and her producer betrays her and her empire reveals itself to be hollow? Maybe not. Culturally, we've seen a lot of deconstruction stories over the last decade in particular. The ex-evangelical memoir is basically its own genre now. We've got the books Educated, Uncultured, the whole Substack economy of women who grew up in high control religion, tons of podcasts. And the truth is that deconstruction in real life is a long, messy, often mundane process that doesn't always translate well to the page. It's like reading about death by 1,000 paper cuts. So I don't want to pretend that the Deconstruction Natalie novel is the book that Caro should have actually written. What I think is missing is simpler than that. What's missing is fiction that can imagine a sincere interior life for the person it's critiquing. Just the basic literary move of saying, this character, whose worldview I as the author find objectionable, is a full human being with an inner life that I'm taking seriously. I am going to render her thoughts, her doubts, her prayers, her genuine convictions, and then I'm going to let the reader draw their own conclusions. And I think the reason this kind of writing feels so important is because it seems like, at least here in the US, we have collectively decided that the other side is faking it. Consider the caricature of the feminist with blue hair who hates men, hates children, hates marriage, and wants litter boxes in schools for kids who identify as cats. Liberal women are caricatured as virtue signaling. They don't actually want a multicultural society. Who would want to live near people who speak a different language or are from a different country? They don't actually care about saving the planet. They're just projecting an image so they feel better about themselves as people. Liberals don't actually care about anything at all. They just pretend that they do. It's all just words. Feminists hate their lives and they're just pretending that they don't need a man and that they like having to go to work and they like putting their kids in daycare. That is the mental model of a huge chunk of conservatives, particularly tradwives. That's what they believe about those of us on the left. And that viewpoint is constantly reinforced by the media they consume. I hate this stereotype because I really do want to live in a multicultural society. My life is richer because of the diversity of people that I get to know and work with and be in community with. I love having a career. I love earning my own money and having financial independence. I love getting to decide what my days look like, who I love, how I live. These are not virtue signals. These are sincerely held beliefs that organize how I live. And when tradwife propaganda assumes that I'm faking it, they're making the exact same mistake that the left makes about them. Because on the left, there's a cynical assumption that all tradwives are faking it, that they're all secretly miserable and they hate their husbands and they resent their kids. We assume evangelicals don't really believe what they say they believe, and that pro-lifers are really about controlling women's bodies. There's no room for the truth that some individuals genuinely believe that life begins at conception. You can think they're wrong about that, but they believe it. And pretending that they don't believe it, pretending that the whole thing is a bad faith argument, is a way of not having to actually engage with the belief system itself. And that's the piece that sticks with me after reading Yesteryear. The futility of assuming that everything is a hollow performance. Everyone in that book was just looking out for themselves and willing to sell out their values if it meant positioning themselves for more fame or money or power or opportunities. I suppose you could argue that the producer, Shannon, was the most authentic person in the book, but she also slept with Natalie's husband, so even her loyalty to Natalie was just surface level. The flattening of everyone into a performance for social media is not just a portrayal in this book, but a mirror to our society as a whole. And I think that's troubling because when you can't imagine that the person you disagree with holds their position sincerely, you can't make an actual argument against their position or hold a real dialogue. People may not really understand what they believe. They may not have ever chosen or examined their beliefs, but that's very different from just pretending. Literature is powerful because it's a place that we can put ourselves inside the lives of those that we would never otherwise inhabit. When a book decides that a person is not worth the imaginative effort, when it decides that an entire category of people is too contemptible to render from the inside, then the reader may very well walk away feeling like I did, like something important was missing here, and the characters were just not fully fleshed out. Yesteryear's whole indictment of Natalie is that she's a performer. Her life is a brand, her faith is an aesthetic, her motherhood is a production, her marriage is a marketing campaign. The book's moral argument is that Natalie is spiritually hollow, and the tragedy of her story is that she has built a life out of performance without any sincere interior center. And I think the book, in refusing to imagine Natalie as a sincere person, is doing the exact same thing that it accuses her of doing. It is performing critique without actually believing in the humanity of its target. It's performing the posture of cultural criticism while withholding the one thing cultural criticism actually requires, which is the willingness to grant your subject full personhood. Just like Natalie's social media feed, Yesteryear tells you exactly what it thinks you want to hear about the type of person it's depicting. And yet, here's what surprised me about reading this book. The more I sat with Natalie, the more that I could see her. Not the character the book was trying to give me, but the person underneath. Because you can do this as a reader, even when the author isn't quite doing it for you, right? And it really struck me how Natalie is so lonely. Nobody in her life ever really tries to see her or understand her, and she's just been performing her whole life. The performance didn't start with the camera just made it profitable for her, or more directly profitable. And nobody in her life ever pulled her aside and said, "What do you actually want? Who are you, Natalie, underneath all of this? Are you okay?" Nobody, not one person in 400 pages of a novel. The only person who comes close is her sister, and the book barely lets us see that relationship. I suspect that Caro was aware of this all along, and as the author, she intended for us to reflect on how much of womanhood is a performance. But we don't face these pressures alone. I talk about these pressures with people in my life, people who really know me for who I am, people I can be 100% authentic with. Natalie never did. And it's heartbreaking to see the portrayal of a character who is abandoned by the other adults in her life and then goes on to abandon herself. She doesn't break the cycle with her own kids, but inflicts the pain and damage on them in even deeper ways. And this is why I liked the ending of the book so much. Of course, Natalie would choose the delusion over the humiliation because she had been performing her whole life. The performance was the only version of herself that she'd ever been allowed to have. And when that performance collapsed publicly, there was nothing underneath to fall back on. She had never been given the chance to build a real self. So she built another stage instead, and then she dragged her kids onto it with her. That's the real horror of the book, the effect on the kids, and it's the horror that stuck with me the most after I finished it. Not that Natalie was a fake, but that she was a woman who learned so early on that only her performance was lovable, and that by the time she had her own children, the only thing she knew how to teach them was how to live inside of a stage set. That's not a tradwife story. That is a story about what happens to the children of women who were never seen and then never learned to see. Compassion and accountability are not the same thing. Natalie did real harm, and the book doesn't flinch from that, and I'm glad that it doesn't. But I also found that by the end, I could hold both. I could want her to be punished for what she did, to have consequences, and also grieve for the girl that she was before anyone taught her that the only way to be loved was to be watched. The book doesn't quite let us see Natalie or any of the other characters. But I think the reason that this book has hit the way that it has, the reason that we all can't stop talking about it, is that Natalie is not actually as far away from us as we would like her to be. We're all performing a little. We're all watching other people perform and then trying to make a decision about what's real and what's not. And we're all kind of assuming the worst about people who are different than us because it's easier and it feels better and it lets us off the hook for having to actually look at them. And I think we're all on some level afraid that if the performance ever cracked, there might not be much underneath. That's what Yesteryear is really about, to me. It's an exploration of what happens to a person who was never seen in a culture that rewards her for being inauthentic. And more than that, it's a mirror. The book holds the mirror up to us, and we might not always like what we see. So tell me, if you read Yesteryear, did you feel the loneliness in Natalie, and did it engender any compassion or empathy from you? Or did she remain a villain for you all the way through? What landed for you in this book and what didn't land? Let me know in the comments.